I didn't think anything of it when I first opened the door. It was just another quiet evening, the kind where time drips slowly and the house feels too large for one person's thoughts. My neighbor stood there with his son, homework folder tucked under the boy's arm, asking if I could help him just once. I said yes without hesitation. If I had known how much weight that small yes would carry later, I would have paused longer. The boy was bright, the kind of child who asked questions beyond the textbook. We sat at my dining table, pencils tapping softly, numbers and sentences filling the silence. He worked hard, proud when he got an answer right, disappointed when he didn't. I admired that. Helping him felt simple, useful, harmless. It gave my evenings a shape they had been missing. Soon those sessions became routine. Twice a week turned into 3. His father would wait at the door, always polite, always brief. Nod. Thank you. Sometimes a tired smile. He never lingered, never crossed the threshold, but his presence stayed longer than he did. I told myself that was normal. Neighbors exchange glances. Gratitude looks like attention. Attention doesn't mean anything. My own life had settled into predictability. Conversations at home were practical, efficient, stripped of curiosity. Days passed without anyone asking how I really felt. I didn't label that emptiness. I just learned how to move around it. Helping with homework filled an hour, sometimes 2, where I wasn't thinking about what was missing elsewhere. The boy talked as he worked. About school, about friends, about how his mother used to quiz him before she left. He mentioned her casually, like someone you expect to return even when they don't. I listened more than I spoke. Adults underestimate how much children notice. He noticed everything. Sometimes his father would text to say he was running late. Sometimes he arrived early and waited in the car. Once or twice he stepped inside, standing near the door while his son packed up. We exchanged a few words about grades, teachers, small things that didn't matter. Yet the air felt different when he was there. Quieter. Charged in a way I couldn't explain and didn't try to. I started preparing snacks without thinking. I adjusted my schedule around those evenings. None of it felt deliberate. Felt like courtesy. Ease. The kind of things good people do. That's what I told myself. One evening, as the boy struggled with a paragraph, he looked up at me and smiled, wide and unguarded. You explain things better, he said. Dad says you make everything sound calmer. I laughed it off, correcting his sentence, unaware of the way my chest tightened. It was just a comment. Children repeat things. Words don't always mean what we think they mean. But later, after they left and the house returned to its hollow quiet, I replayed that sentence. Not because it was flattering, but because it didn't feel accidental. Felt like the first loose thread. I didn't pull it. I told myself there was nothing there to unravel. I turned off the light, confident that I was still standing on solid ground, unaware that the smallest cracks had already begun to form. The night it happened felt no different at first. The boy arrived with the same worn folder, the same restless energy, dropping into the chair like he belonged there. We went through math problems, then reading comprehension. I corrected his mistakes gently, praised his effort, kept my tone steady. Everything was exactly as it had always been, which is why what came next landed so hard. Halfway through a sentence, he stopped and frowned, pencil hovering in the air. Can I ask you something that's not about school? He said. I nodded, distracted, already scanning the next paragraph. He didn't speak right away. Children hesitate when they're about to say something they know might change things. Dad smiles differently when he talks about you, he said casually, like it was an observation about the weather. The room went still. I looked at him, certain I had misheard. He was already back to his paper, erasing an answer, unaware of what he'd just dropped between us. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't belong to me. He probably just means homework, I said. Parents smile when kids do better in school. The boy shook his head. No. He doesn't smile like that about school. I didn't respond. My hands felt heavy, my thoughts suddenly loud. I corrected the rest of his work on autopilot, nodding when he spoke, barely hearing him. When his father arrived, I avoided eye contact, passing over the folder too quickly. He thanked me as always. His voice sounded the same, but I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was listening for what I'd missed before. After they left, the sentence echoed. Dad smiles differently. I sat alone, staring at the empty chair, replaying every interaction I had dismissed. The brief pauses in conversation. The way he asked how my day was, not out of politeness but curiosity. The way he remembered small details I didn't recall sharing. None of it had seemed wrong at the time. That was the problem. I told myself children misunderstand adults all the time. They project meaning where there is none. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the clearer it became. His son hadn't been guessing. He'd been noticing. Children don't analyze emotions. They absorb them. I thought about my own behavior. How I leaned forward when his father spoke. How I felt a quiet lift in my chest when his name appeared on my phone. I had never touched him. Never spoken a word that crossed an obvious line. But honesty forced a different realization. I had been waiting for those moments. Anticipating them. Letting them matter more than they should. That realization brought heat to my face, then shame. Emotional closeness doesn't announce itself. It slips in, disguised as conversation, concern, familiarity. I hadn't set out to betray anyone. Yet something private had formed where it didn't belong. The most unsettling part wasn't that a boundary had blurred. It was that a child had seen it before I was willing to name it. His words hadn't accused me. They hadn't warned me. They had simply reflected the truth I was avoiding. That night I slept poorly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boy's calm expression, the way he said it without judgment. As if he assumed adults would know what to do with things after that. I spoke less, kept my replies short, focused strictly on the work. But restraint doesn't erase awareness. Sharpens it. Every word carried weight now. Every pause felt intentional, even when it wasn't. A few days later, his father arrived early. The boy was still packing his bag, distracted by his phone, leaving us with a stretch of silence that neither of us rushed to fill. He thanked me again, then added quietly that his son had improved a lot. I nodded, already reaching for the folder, ready to end the exchange. He didn't take it right away. He looks forward to coming here, he said. I think he feels understood. So did I. The thought came uninvited, and I hated how true it felt. He didn't mention his son again. Instead, he asked how I was doing. Not the polite version of the question, the kind that expects a polite answer. He asked the way people do when they notice cracks. I told him I was fine. He didn't argue, but his expression said he didn't believe me. I haven't talked to anyone like this in a long time, he said. Not just about schedules or responsibilities. Just talking. The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than a confession would have. There was no flirtation, no dramatic declaration. Just loneliness laid bare. I should have shut it down then. I knew that. Instead, I listened. I told him I understood. That was the moment I crossed a line I could no longer pretend wasn't there. Understanding is intimate. It creates space where attachment grows. We didn't speak for long, but when he left, the silence felt heavier than before. At home, I noticed everything that was missing. The absence of curiosity. The way conversations stayed on the surface. I hated myself for making comparisons, but I couldn't stop. Emotional needs don't wait for permission. The next tutoring session felt wrong before it even began. I was too aware of myself, of how careful I was being, of how easily that care could turn into something else. When the boy asked a question, I answered, but my attention kept drifting. This wasn't fair to him, or to anyone. Later that evening, his father messaged me, thanking me again, adding that he appreciated how patient I was. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. My response was polite, distant, exactly as it should have been. Still, my heart beat faster than it had any right to. I realized then that desire doesn't always feel like passion. Sometimes it feels like relief, like being seen. That's what made it dangerous. There was no villain in this situation. Just two people recognizing something in each other that life had quietly taken away. I couldn't let that be an excuse. I wasn't innocent anymore, even if nothing physical had happened. I had allowed myself to step outside the boundaries I once thought were unmovable. That knowledge sat heavy in my chest, demanding a choice. I knew how these stories ended when no one intervened. Small allowances became habits. Habits became justifications. I had reached the last moment where restraint was still possible. Walking away would hurt. Staying would cost more than I was willing to admit. I didn't announce my decision. I just made it. When the next message came asking about tutoring, I replied that I wouldn't be able to continue. I kept the explanation short, neutral, impossible to question. As soon as I sent it, my hands started shaking. Not because I doubted the choice, but because of what it cost. The boy asked about it the next time I saw him. His confusion was quiet, restrained, more mature than it should have been. I told him I was busy now. He nodded, accepting it without pushing, the way children do when they sense adults are carrying things they don't understand. That hurt more than any confrontation would have. His father never argued. He simply thanked me for everything I'd done and said he understood. That word again. Understood. It felt heavier this time. Final in a way the others hadn't been. We didn't linger. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We let the distance settle where it needed to be. The silence that followed was uncomfortable but clean. There were no messages to reread. No glances to interpret. Just the echo of what almost became something else. I had expected relief. What I felt instead was grief. Not for a relationship that ended, but for one that never should have begun. I started paying closer attention to myself. To how easily loneliness disguised itself as connection. To how quickly kindness can blur into attachment when boundaries are neglected. I had always believed betrayal required intent. Now I understood that negligence can be just as damaging. The boy's words stayed with me. Not as an accusation but as a mirror. He hadn't been revealing a secret. He had been stating a fact, trusting that adults would handle it responsibly. In that moment, he had seen the truth before either of us had the courage to name it. Nothing dramatic followed. No confessions, no confrontations, no explosions. Just a quiet correction. That, I realized, is how most moral failures are resolved when they're caught early. Not with chaos, but with restraint. I didn't tell anyone what happened. There was nothing to confess that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Instead, I sat with a discomfort, letting it teach me something I needed to learn. Emotional infidelity doesn't begin with touch. It begins with permission. Permission to be seen in ways that belong elsewhere. Sometimes I think about how easily this could have gone differently. How one more conversation, one more shared vulnerability, might have tipped the balance. That thought still unsettles me. Not because I regret stopping, but because of how close I came to justifying more. The house returned to its quiet routines. The table stayed empty in the evenings. And yet something had changed. I was more careful with my attention. More aware of the power it carries. Because the most dangerous lines aren't the obvious ones. They're the ones we step over while telling ourselves we're still standing in the same place.